Firemen were responding to a report of a fire in a West Side hotel room.
New York City, late 1970s. Times Square was full of neon lights, movie theaters, and nightclubs.
They found much more than they had anticipated.
But behind the flashing signs and busy streets, something evil was growing.
It was the hotel room from hell.
People came to this place for fun, for escape, for adventure.
You had the smell from burning flesh. The smoke was thick.
But not everyone left alive. In the middle of the noise and chaos, a cold-blooded killer was watching.
They crawled into the room, not being able to see.
He didn't stand out. He blended into the crowd. He smiled, spoke kindly, and walked with confidence. No one knew that this man was hunting. This wasn't just a story of murder. It was a story of fear, of how a city's most famous spot became a trap. Women began to disappear. Their bodies were found later, burned, hidden in motel rooms, lifeless. The killer didn't just take lives. He erased them, leaving behind puzzles too dark to understand. As detectives searched for answers, they realized they were dealing with someone unlike any criminal before. This wasn't a random killer. This was someone with a plan. Someone who enjoyed the game. And all the while, Times Square kept glowing. The lights stayed bright. The music played. But underneath it all, death was walking unnoticed. Right in front of everyone, Times Square turns dark. Times Square was once called the crossroads of the world. But by the late 1970s, it was changing. What was once a place of wonder became a breeding ground for crime, fear, and shadows. The bright lights still shined, but underneath them drugs, sex work, and danger ruled the streets. The area was filled with rundown motels, peep shows, and theaters playing adult films. People who lived on the edge of society gathered here, some to hide, some to survive. And in this chaos, the Times Square killer found the perfect hunting ground. He used the noise and confusion to move quietly. He chose victims who might not be missed right away. Many were women working alone, often desperate and vulnerable. The killer knew no one would ask questions too quickly in this part of the city. While tourists still came to take photos under the lights, a nightmare was unfolding just steps away. The killer left behind almost no clues, and the city was too distracted to notice. What was once the heart of entertainment now pulsed with horror. Times Square had turned dark, not because the lights went out, but because evil had found its stage. And it was just getting started. Bodies in burning rooms. The first bodies were found in motel rooms. Charred, lifeless, and horrifying. At first, police thought they were accidental fires caused by careless guests or faulty wiring. But something didn't add up. The victims were tied to beds. The doors were locked from the outside. These weren't accidents. They were murders made to look like mistakes. The killer used fire not just to destroy evidence, but to terrify. Flames erased fingerprints, melted clues, and made it nearly impossible to tell who the victims were. He turned simple motel rooms into cremation chambers. Each scene was carefully planned, each exit timed. Detectives soon realized a pattern. The victims were mostly women, often sex workers or those living on society's margins. The killer knew how the system worked. He knew these women were less likely to be noticed, less likely to be missed. But despite the smoke and ashes, small pieces of truth survived. A hotel guest remembered a man leaving just before the fire. A cleaning lady found something strange. Step by step, the clues began to form a picture, a dark one. The killer was clever. But now the hunt had begun. And the city was starting to wake up to the horror hiding in its heart. Police face a twisted puzzle. The NYPD had seen violence before, but this case was different. The killer left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no clear motive. Fires destroyed most evidence. Victims had few connections. Each crime scene was like a dead end. Detectives were chasing shadows. Witnesses gave blurry details. One described a polite man in a suit. Another remembered nothing at all. The killer blended in too well, calm, clean, careful. The city offered few answers, but the fear was growing. News spread of the burnt bodies and hidden murders. Pressure built on the police to find the monster behind the flames. Slowly, piece by piece, they began to see the pattern. The killer had a method, a twisted logic. He picked quiet victims. He planned every detail. He vanished without a trace. This wasn't just a crime. It was a message, one written in smoke and fear. And the police knew time was running out. The man behind the mask, his real name was Richard Cottingham, but to the world, he was still a mystery. To neighbors, he seemed like a normal man, quiet, working a steady job, even married with kids. No one imagined he was hiding a monster behind his calm smile. By day, he worked in a computer office. By night, he became a hunter. He knew the streets, the motels, the routine of the city. He didn't act out of rage. He acted with cold, steady hands. He was always in control. Cottingham picked his victims carefully. He chose places with weak security. He planned how to enter and leave. He used fire to wipe away evidence. And when he spoke, he sounded harmless, charming even. But inside, there was only darkness. No mercy, no regret. Just a deep need to control, to destroy, to feed on fear. The police were closing in, but Cottingham didn't flinch. He thought he was smarter than them, untouchable, invisible. But every mask eventually cracks, and his time was running out. Fear grips the city as more bodies were discovered. Fear began to spread through New York like wildfire. Women were afraid to walk alone. Motel workers grew nervous. The city that never slept was now filled with sleepless nights, for all the wrong reasons. News outlets started covering the story, but details were scarce. The killer had no name, no face, no pattern the public could follow. Just fire, silence, and death. The mystery made it worse. Anyone could be next. No one felt safe. Times Square, once full of life, felt colder. The neon lights couldn't hide the unease in people's eyes. The killer's shadow stretched wider with each passing day as detectives worked without rest. Families of the missing cried for justice. Activists demanded answers. Still, the murderer walked free, calm and unnoticed in the crowds. The fear wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what could still come. And the silence left behind after each fire was louder than anything the city had ever heard. Secrets of the motel rooms. The killer didn't strike in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. He chose cheap motel rooms. Places meant for privacy, for secrets. These motels sat quietly on the edges of Times Square, their neon signs flickering above narrow stairways and silent halls. Room after room became a crime scene. Beds turned into deathbeds. Smoke, stained ceilings held the last breath of terrified victims. Housekeepers found horror where they expected routine. Each time, the killer slipped away, leaving behind only ashes and silence. But the rooms began to tell stories. One had signs of a struggle. Another had a faint smell of gasoline. A third had a witness who heard strange sounds, crying, then nothing. The motel managers didn't ask many questions. Guests came and went all the time. No one wanted trouble. But slowly, detectives gathered scraps of truth from behind those thin motel walls. These rooms were more than hiding places. They were part of the killer's ritual, controlled, quiet, perfect for what he needed. And as the police connected the dots, they realized these motels were not just settings for his crimes, they were part of his weapon. A chilling confession: when Richard Cottingham was finally caught, it wasn't dramatic. No chase, no shootout, just a quiet arrest in a hotel room where he had left another victim barely alive. But what followed was far more disturbing than anyone expected. At first, he said nothing, cold, silent. But over time, his words began to spill out, slow, controlled, emotionless. He confessed to crimes no one had even linked to him yet. Murders long buried, victims never named. It was as if he had been keeping score in his mind all along. His confession was chilling not just for what he said, but how he said it. No regret, no sorrow, just facts. Times, names, details. He remembered everything. He seemed proud of how careful he'd been, how long he'd escaped justice. Some investigators couldn't sleep after hearing him speak. Victims' families wept as they learned the truth. Cottingham had hidden in plain sight for years, and now his own words were the sharpest weapon. But even with his arrest, not every question had an answer, and not every victim had a name. His confession brought light to many dark places, but it also showed how many shadows still remained. Justice in the shadows. Richard Cottingham was finally behind bars, but for many, justice felt incomplete. The courts found him guilty of multiple murders, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Still, the full weight of his crimes remained hidden. He was suspected of killing dozens, maybe more. But proving each one was a battle against time, lost records and burned evidence. For the families of the unnamed and forgotten victims, closure never fully came. Many lived with questions that would never be answered. Who were these women? What were their stories? Why did no one protect them? Detectives kept digging, even years later. Some retired, others passed on the case to new hands. A few brave journalists followed the trail, trying to give voices to the silenced. Cottingham remained cold, locked away, yet still holding secrets. He had taken lives in the shadows, and even now, parts of his story stayed buried there. Justice had come, but not in full daylight. It crept through the same shadows where the killer once walked. And for a city that had survived his terror, Remembering was the only way to ensure the darkness never returned.